Hey, I want you to do something for me. Take just a second and think about the last time you had a really, truly passionate conversation about a current event. You probably felt deeply about your position, right? Like in your bones. But ask yourself, did that deeply held opinion actually originate organically within you? Or was the foundation for that thought subtly placed there by forces you aren't even fully aware of? Today, we're going to explore exactly how that happens.
Welcome to The Explainer. Our main goal today is pretty ambitious. We are pulling back the curtain on how our attention, the opinions we find acceptable, and our very political realities are shaped by external forces. We're essentially mapping out the invisible strings that construct public reality. It's a fascinating and honestly kind of unsettling journey through media theory, political science, and modern information warfare. Let's dive in.
Section 1. Pictures in our heads.
To really get this, we need to put on our clinical observer hats and dissect the machinery of society right down to its foundational gears. Our journey actually starts over a century ago with this concept of the pseudo-environment. It was coined by Walter Lippmann way back in his 1922 book, Public Opinion. Lippmann basically argued that the real world out there, it's just too big, too complex, and changes way too fast for any of us to directly manage or even comprehend. We literally aren't equipped to deal with all that subtlety. So what happens? The mass media steps in. They offer us simplified models, what Lippmann called the pictures in our heads. We don't actually react to real-world events anymore. We react to these simplified, media-constructed pictures.
Fast forward a bit to 1963, and Bernard Cohen perfectly crystallized how Lippmann's idea evolved. He had this brilliant quote. He said, "The press may not be successful much of the time in telling people what to think, but it is stunningly successful in telling its readers what to think about." It's so true. Think of the media as a lens or a filter. It doesn't just act like a passive mirror perfectly reflecting reality back at us. No, it actively filters reality to set an agenda. It decides which parts of the world get illuminated and which stay completely in the dark.
Section 2. Media as the gatekeeper. So moving into the actual mechanics of this filtering, let's look at 1968. Researchers Maxwell McCombs and Donald Shaw formally developed agenda-setting theory during the U.S. presidential election in what's known as the Chapel Hill study. And what they found was wild. They discovered a massive, direct correlation between the issues the local news media reported on prominently and what undecided voters actually believed were the most important issues of the election. Basically, they proved that by controlling the volume and frequency of coverage, what they call issue saliency, the media holds just tremendous sway over public priorities.
This brilliantly illustrates exactly how an idea moves through society. It's basically a three-step flow. First, an issue passes through an editor's desk to become part of the media agenda. Second, through a cognitive process called accessibility, the sheer frequency of these messages pushes the issue into the public agenda, meaning you and I start to think, wow, this is incredibly important. And finally, step 3, this public pressure forces lawmakers to act, creating the policy agenda. Boom, boom, boom. One flows right into the next.
Researchers break this down into 3 specific models on the cognitive level. First, you've got the awareness model, which is super simple. If the media doesn't report on it, you probably won't even know it exists. Then there's the priorities model, meaning you'll naturally start to align your personal priorities with whatever the media's priorities are. And lastly, the salience model. This is all about accessibility. Think about it. If someone stopped you on the street and asks, what's the biggest problem facing the country today? You're naturally going to answer with the topic that's floating right at the top of your mind. And guess what? That is almost always the exact issue the media has been covering the most.
Section 3. The window of acceptability.
Okay, so we've established how the media sets our agenda and tells us what to think about. But how do political frameworks define what's even acceptable to talk about in the first place? Well, enter the Overton window. This is a concept named after policy analyst Joseph Overton, and it frames the exact range of policies a politician can recommend without looking completely extreme or radical to the mainstream public. But here is the absolutely crucial point, and it's a common misconception. Lawmakers themselves rarely shift this window. Nope, their job is simply to detect where the window currently is and stay safely inside it so they can survive politically.
Political commentator Joshua Trevino broke this process down into 6 distinct degrees of acceptance. Watch how an idea moves. It starts way outside the window as completely unthinkable. Then advocates push hard to make it radical, then acceptable, then sensible, then popular, and finally it becomes official policy. Proponents of an idea are constantly locked in this intense battle to expand the window to include their preferred policies, while opponents are fighting just as hard to narrow it. And to be perfectly clear here, this tool is used equally by think tanks on both the political left and the political right to shift societal norms over time.
Section 4. Weaponizing the narrative.
All right, now we're shifting gears from domestic media theory to deliberate manipulation by global state actors. The mass diffusion of the internet has completely connected our digital nodes, fundamentally shrinking the contexts of time and space. We just aren't limited to the geographic boundaries that used to define traditional media anymore. Today, those old psychological theories, they've been completely modernized and weaponized through data curation, behavioral profiling, and computational microtargeting. Welcome to the new era of digital information intervention.
Historically, especially right after World War II, the U.S. really fractured its communication. Public affairs was meant for domestic audiences, public diplomacy was for foreign audiences, and psychological operations, or PSYOPs, well, that was strictly for hostile adversaries. But today, yeah, that paradigm is completely gone. The modern threat is hybrid information warfare. This is where state-sponsored campaigns use the cost-effectiveness of cyberspace to target domestic, foreign, and hostile audiences all at exactly the same time. Globally, state adversaries are actively blending these behavioral and structural frameworks. For instance, China's three warfares policy tightly integrates psychological, media, and legal warfare as an asymmetric way to advance their state interests. Similarly, Russia's approach, which is often called the Gerasimov or Premykov doctrine, utilizes an offensive hybrid strategy where literally all state assets work in unison. We're talking economics, culture, information, the whole shebang. They treat information as a sharp power weapon to actively intervene in democratic processes worldwide.
Section 5. Who controls your agenda? Let's break the fourth wall here and bring this massive geopolitical shift right back down to your daily digital life. Because while state actors are out there trying to manipulate the global narrative, the reality of our modern internet is media fragmentation. We live in a wildly high-choice environment. We no longer have a single unified public agenda like we did back when there were only, 3 TV networks. Instead, we selectively consume content that completely aligns with our pre-existing beliefs. This creates highly fragmented echo chambers and incredibly personalized individual agendas.
In this hyper-fragmented world, the battle for your mind takes two very distinct forms. On one hand, there's agenda building. This is where anonymous internet opinions rickle through blogs, eventually get picked up by traditional media, and can actually force real policy changes. But just as importantly, and honestly, maybe a bit more insidiously, there is agenda cutting. This is the subtle art of directing your attention completely away from relevant issues. How? By burying them, removing them, or just deliberately ignoring significant controversial topics altogether so they never ever reach those pictures in your head.
Which brings us to our final question. We've seen exactly how the media builds the pictures in our heads. We've seen how the Overton window dictates what we are even allowed to discuss. And we've seen how global actors use the modern digital landscape to weaponize our very attention. So, the next time you log online and scroll through your carefully curated media diet, I really want you to ask yourself, are your deepest concerns actually yours? Or are you just dancing to the tune of whoever happens to be pulling the invisible strings? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.